There was a house in the quiet outskirts of a forgotten town. Locals called it cursed, claiming it had once belonged to a man who practiced dark rituals. The house had sat vacant for years after his mysterious disappearance. No one dared enter, especially not after sundown. Yet every few months, someone new would be lured by the cheap rent. And each time, they left without a trace, or worse. Tonight, we'll step inside that house. We'll learn the reason why no one stays. And by the end, you'll know why this house is called The Last Tenant. Lily was a young teacher, newly hired at a school in the next town over. Her budget was tight, so when she saw the ad for a house with such low rent, she jumped at the opportunity. The house was old but charming, with a garden overgrown with weeds and ivy creeping up the faded walls. There was something eerie about it, but Lily dismissed her discomfort as just nerves. When she met the landlord, he seemed shifty, barely making eye contact. He handed her the keys without a word, simply muttering, "Best stay away from the attic." Lily shrugged it off, thinking it might be dangerous or in disrepair. The first few days went by peacefully. She enjoyed the solitude, far away from the noise of the city. But one night, as she was unpacking in the dim glow of a single bulb, her eyes landed on a dusty, locked door in the hallway leading to the attic. Against her better judgment, she decided to explore. After fumbling around with the old lock, it finally clicked open. Inside, she found a small room, dimly lit by a narrow window, covered with strange markings etched into the floor and walls. The carvings seemed ancient, radiating a sense of dread that made her skin crawl. The air felt unnaturally cold, almost icy, as if the room itself was alive. As she looked closer, she noticed scratches on the walls, almost like claw marks, leading in a circular path around the center of the room. In the middle lay an old, rusted box. Curiosity got the best of her, and she opened it. Inside was a piece of yellowed paper with an eerie inscription. "To awaken what sleeps below is to curse the one above." Shivers ran down her spine as she hastily shut the box and left the attic. That night, Lily was jolted awake by whispers, so faint at first that she thought it might be her imagination. But the whispers grew louder, angrier, as if accusing her of something. Heart pounding, she turned on her bedside lamp, but the bulb flickered and died, leaving her in total darkness. She reached for her phone, only to realize it was missing. The whispers turned into guttural growls, low and menacing, filling the room with a chilling energy. In the dim moonlight, she saw a shadow at the foot of her bed, tall, hunched, with long twisted fingers that seemed to claw at the air. Lily lay frozen, barely able to breathe. The shadow began to move, creeping closer, its breath hot and rancid on her face. She shut her eyes, hoping it was just a nightmare, but the sharp pain of something ice-cold gripping her wrist jolted her fully awake. When she opened her eyes, there was no one there, but bruises in the shape of fingers had formed on her wrist. The next few days were an unrelenting descent into terror. She tried ignoring the occurrences, convincing herself it was just stress. But every night, the haunting intensified. She began seeing her reflection in mirrors twist into a version of herself with hollow, black eyes and a grotesque smile. Her doppelganger would mimic her actions, its movements exaggerated and mocking, its smile widening with each glance. It whispered her name in a taunting tone, promising pain, begging her to stay a little longer. One evening, after another sleepless night, she heard something moving around in the attic. She could no longer ignore it. Summoning her courage, she grabbed a flashlight and made her way up. As she ascended the stairs, she felt a weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The air thickened, heavy with a smell she could only describe as death. The room was even darker than she remembered, the carvings on the walls glowing faintly as if they were alive. As she moved the flashlight around, she noticed a figure crouching in the corner, a twisted, emaciated figure with hollow eyes and skin stretched tight over its bones. It was whispering, scratching at the floor with its long bony fingers, repeating the words, "I'll stay. I'll stay forever." Suddenly, the figure lunged at her. She screamed, dropping the flashlight, and scrambled back down the stairs, tripping and tumbling until she hit the floor below. When she looked back, the attic door had slammed shut on its own. Her ankle throbbed with pain, but she dragged herself away, desperate to escape. The next morning, Lily found scratch marks on her walls, spelling out her name over and over. The bruises on her wrist had darkened, spreading up her arm in jagged, vein-like patterns. She tried calling for help, but every time she dialed, she would hear a low, guttural voice on the other end, repeating her name, Lily, stay. She knew she had to get out. She packed her things hastily, but when she reached for the front door, it wouldn't budge. It was as if an invisible force was holding it shut. In a panic, she tried breaking a window, but her arms wouldn't obey her, stopping mid-air, as if controlled by someone else. That night, the demon claimed her fully. She was compelled to go to the attic, her legs moving against her will. She opened the rusted box, her hand shaking, and read the inscription aloud, unknowingly sealing her fate. As she finished, the demon took hold of her, twisting her body painfully as it forced her to carve symbols into her own skin, marking her as its own. Days later, a new for rent sign appeared outside the house. The landlord, grinning, knew another unfortunate soul would soon come to take Lily's place, never realizing that she was now bound to the house, a twisted shadow in the attic, waiting to drag the next tenant into the same nightmare that had taken her soul. The house, cursed and hungry, would feed again. Imagine living with someone who feels off. Someone who shares your space, but never your comfort. When Sarah's new roommate started acting strangely, she thought it was just stress, maybe homesickness. But late one night, she saw something in her roommate's eyes, a glint that wasn't human. Soon, she would realize she was living with something darker than she could ever imagine. Something not of this world. Sarah was a student at a bustling city university. Renting an apartment on her own was out of the question, so when she found a decent one with an open room, she was thrilled. Her roommate, Emma, was quiet, seemingly the shy type who kept to herself. They exchanged only polite nods for the first few weeks, and that was fine with Sarah. She was busy, and so was Emma. But over time, Sarah began noticing odd things about Emma. For one, Emma never seemed to sleep. At night, Sarah would hear her pacing the floor, whispering to herself in a voice too low to understand. And it wasn't just at night. Sometimes Sarah would find Emma sitting in the dark in the living room, facing the wall, as if waiting for something. Whenever Sarah tried to talk to her, Emma's eyes would flicker over to her, but she'd only give a tight, unsettling smile before turning away again. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Sarah came home to find all the lights in the apartment off, save for one faint light coming from under Emma's door. As Sarah walked by, she heard a strange sound, almost like chanting, in a language she didn't understand. Goosebumps prickled her skin, but she forced herself to knock gently on the door. The chanting stopped, and there was a long silence. Then, Emma's voice came through, low and raspy, "Come in." The room was filled with an overpowering scent, a mix of incense and something metallic, like blood. Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed, surrounded by small, unlit candles. The air felt thick, oppressive, and it was as if a shadow lurked behind her, invisible yet tangible. Sarah tried to ask what she was doing, but her voice caught in her throat. Emma opened her eyes slowly, and for a brief, horrifying moment, her pupils looked completely black, as though something dark had taken over. "Just meditating," Emma said in a voice that sounded hollow, far away. Then she smiled, but there was something wrong with that smile, too wide, too forced, and her eyes remained dead, as if her face was just a mask. That night, Sarah locked her door, unable to shake the image of Emma's pitch-black eyes. She hardly slept, and around 3 a.m., she was awoken by a scratching sound coming from the other side of her door. It was faint, deliberate, and it sent chills down her spine. She lay frozen, too terrified to move. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if someone or something was desperately trying to get in. In the morning, she found scratches etched into her door, deep and jagged. When she confronted Emma about it, her roommate merely shrugged, her face expressionless. "Must have been the wind," she said with that eerie smile, her eyes unblinking. Over the next few days, things took a darker turn. Sarah began having vivid nightmares, each more disturbing than the last. In one, she was in a dimly lit room with a strange symbol painted on the walls, and she could feel something watching her, breathing just inches away, though she couldn't see it. In another, she saw Emma standing over her bed, eyes black, mouth dripping with blood as she whispered Sarah's name in a voice so guttural it barely sounded human. One night, Sarah woke up to find Emma standing over her bed, exactly like in her nightmares. Emma's face was inches away, eyes wide and unblinking, lips parted in a grotesque smile. Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came out. Emma's fingers reached for Sarah's face, her touch icy and paralyzing. "I need you," she whispered, her voice layered with another deeper voice. "I need another soul." Emma's hand tightened around Sarah's throat, squeezing the air from her lungs. But just as Sarah's vision began to blur, Emma's body jolted, her face twisting in pain as if fighting something within herself. She let go, stumbling back with a scream that sounded more animal than human. She collapsed to the floor, writhing, clutching her head as she let out guttural screams. The next morning, Sarah awoke to find Emma gone, her belongings abandoned, the apartment silent. She hoped it was over, but in her heart, she knew it wasn't. That night, as she tried to sleep, she heard the faint sound of scratching at her door again. She opened her eyes, and there on the wall was the same strange symbol from her nightmares, freshly painted in red. A deep, gravelly voice whispered from the shadows, "I'm not done with you yet." Sarah moved out the next day, but wherever she went, she would see Emma's face in crowds, in reflections, always watching. One night, she returned home to find the symbol painted on her bedroom wall. And this time she knew Emma, or whatever had taken Emma, had followed her. She'd be running, but she would never be safe. Emma's dark, hollow eyes would haunt her forever. It's one thing to fear strangers, but when fear strikes within your own family, there's nowhere to run. When Mia noticed her sister behaving strangely, she brushed it off as teenage angst. But the darkness lurking behind her sister's eyes was beyond anything human. Soon, Mia would find herself face to face with a force so evil, it craved to consume her too, no matter what she did to escape. Mia and her younger sister Lily had always been close, sharing secrets, laughs, and late-night chats that bonded them for life. But that bond began to fray when Lily turned 16. It started with small things. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and wander the house, her eyes glassy, her movements robotic. She would stand by Mia's bed, not saying a word, staring at her with a strange, vacant expression. At first, Mia thought it was sleepwalking. But then Lily began muttering in her sleep, in a voice that didn't sound like hers. She'd speak in a guttural, dark tone, and the words made no sense, like a language Mia had never heard before. "Lil, wake up," she'd say, shaking her sister gently. But Lily wouldn't wake. Her eyes would open, empty and unblinking, a disturbing grin spreading across her face. And then, as suddenly as she'd started, she'd stop, going limp and sinking back into bed as if nothing had happened. Mia didn't want to worry her parents, so she tried to handle it on her own. But things only grew worse. One night, she awoke to the sound of scraping, a dull, repetitive noise that seemed to come from beneath her bed. She leaned over the edge, her heart pounding, and saw Lily, curled up in the darkness, scratching at the wooden frame with her fingernails, her face contorted into a twisted grin. "Lily!" Mia gasped, horrified. Lily's eyes snapped up to meet hers, wide and black as coal. "Sure," Lily whispered, her voice a harsh rasp that barely sounded human. "They're watching." Mia pulled her sister out from under the bed, shaken to the core. But Lily's behavior continued, growing darker and more erratic. She began drawing strange symbols on the walls of her room, symbols that Mia later discovered were ancient runes used in demonic rituals. She would speak to herself in her room, carrying on conversations with someone unseen, giggling and whispering as though someone was answering her. One evening, Mia was home alone with Lily, who had locked herself in her room. There was a heavy, suffocating silence in the house, broken only by Lily's eerie humming. Mia knocked on the door, her hand shaking, trying to steady her voice. "Lily, are you okay?" There was no response, only the humming, growing louder and louder until it filled the entire house. Mia's heart raced. She tried the door again, but it wouldn't budge. Then she heard it, a deep guttural laughter that seemed to echo from within the walls, vibrating through the floor. And then, the door swung open on its own, revealing a scene that chilled Mia to the bone. Lily stood in the center of her room, candles lit in a circle around her, symbols drawn in red on the floor. Her head was tilted back, her eyes rolled into her skull, and her mouth hung open in a twisted, unnatural smile. She was laughing, but her voice sounded layered, as if something else was laughing with her, something dark and ancient. "Lily!" Mia shouted, stepping forward, but the laughter stopped abruptly. Lily's eyes shot open, and she stared at Mia, unblinking. "It's too late," she said in that hollow, otherworldly voice. "I've invited them in." Mia felt a chill crawl up her spine as Lily began to approach her, her movements jerky, unnatural, as though something was controlling her from within. Who are you?" Mia stammered, backing away. Lily's face twisted into a grotesque expression, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I am not your sister anymore." And with that, she lunged, grabbing Mia's wrist with icy hands, her grip painfully tight. Mia could feel her sister's nails digging into her skin, leaving bloody marks as Lily's eyes gleamed with malice. Just then, Mia felt an inexplicable force pull her back, breaking Lily's grip. She stumbled out of the room, slamming the door shut and pressing herself against it, her heart hammering in her chest. Inside, she could hear Lily clawing at the door, her laughter echoing through the house. Desperate and terrified, Mia ran to her parents, who had just returned home. She tried to explain, but they dismissed it as a phase. But later that night, the entire family was awoken by a blood-curdling scream from Lily's room. They rushed in to find her writhing on the floor, her body twisting in unnatural angles, her eyes black as coal, staring straight up, her mouth moving soundlessly as if she was speaking to someone they couldn't see. Her parents called for help, but it was too late. Lily's body arched up, a guttural voice filling the room, speaking in that ancient, unknown language, her body thrashing violently before it went limp. The last thing they heard her say in that otherworldly voice was, "One down, one to go." Lily's lifeless body was taken away, but Mia knew in her heart that something evil had taken her sister from her. That night, as she lay in bed, she felt a cold hand rest on her shoulder, and a whisper in her ear, "You're next." She tried to run to escape, but no matter where she went, she would feel Lily's presence, her voice echoing in the darkness, reminding her that the ritual was not complete.